interested in. The flaw that hedychiums have as garden plants in our country is, again, not that they're not hardy. Most of them are, not all of them, most of them are. But many of them just never flower in our climate because they flower right at the end of the season, and either they get knocked to the ground by early frosts or it's just never warm enough. But here's one, we don't have a name for it yet, but here's one that flowers at this time of year, and so it reliably flowers every year. And one of the things that I've been trying to do is to select from the thousands and thousands of wild seedlings that we've got, plants that are likely to do well in gardens in this country, because you know, that's the real role of plant hunters in horticulture, is to bring in not just new plants, but new plants that are good in gardens. A lot of the things that you see sold as being new are interesting only by virtue of being new, not because they're good garden plants. And it's worth taking time, if you can afford it, to assess which are the best ones for our climate. Agapanthus is another craze of mine. There are lots and lots of cultivars in cultivation. Some of them are very inferior, in my opinion, and it's really worth seeing them in flower and selecting them in flower. Most of the ones that you can see in here are not named varieties, or at least they're not. They don't have proper registered cultivar names. I've imported them from South Africa, from a guy who goes out and collects seed in the wild and grows wild accessions. And just by looking around, you can see how much natural variation there is in the genus, which we can select and bring into cultivation. This one, for example, is a fantastic, very dark flowered Agapanthus innerpertus selection. You can always tell Agapanthus innerpertus because this is another example. The flowers all hang vertically downwards. It's very, very distinct. And the flower heads are rather small. I like that, and I think it's very elegant with the contrast of this extremely tall, straight, upright stem and the rather small flower heads. With other people, leaves them cold.
Do they have the same hardiness?
Innerpertus, it varies. They occur from close to sea level up to the top of the sort of high Drakensberg, and the ones from sea level are not very hardy. But it's a good point. I mean, a lot of people still persist in thinking Agapanthus aren't hardy. They are hardy. I will show you the stock beds. We've got hundreds of them growing out there, and they do really well. As long as you plant them in the spring, plant them relatively deep, and then mulch them, they're absolutely no problem at all in our climate, except for some of the tender evergreen species where even then they're not killed, but what happens is that the foliage wants to remain evergreen. It gets knocked to the ground by the frosts every winter, and over time the plant just goes back and back and back and stops flowering and eventually disappears. But the plants that are naturally deciduous are all hardy in our south of England climate, without exception.